Now we're going to talk about facing turn check raise, and in the same vein as facing flop check raise, it's important to realize that when your opponent does check raise you on the turn, generally speaking, they risk a fairly large amount to win not that big of a pot. So in general, you're only going to have to defend your turn bet range, something along the lines of 40 to 50%, and it can be more or less than that based around the size that they elect to use. So when you are facing a turn check raise, the first question you should ask yourself is, how much of my range do I need to defend? Because, if let's say that they check raise you on the small side and you bet, let's just say you bet something along the lines of 2/3 pot, and they check raise you to around 3x your bet size. Even then, you're only going to have to defend about 40-45% of your range in order to not allow them an opportunity to bluff you with low equity or close to non-equity hands. Now, they really shouldn't be taking non-equity hands as check raise bluffs on the turn anyway, because there's generally equity bluffs that they can select that will be better hands. But the point remains that you're not going to have to defend that turn check raise that much, or that wide, in order to play it in a way that they can't bluff you. Now, so the first thing that when you're facing a turn check raise, you have to decide is, what is the size that my opponent's using? How much of my range do I need to defend? And then once you've decided that, you want to break it. You want to basically defend in a way that most of your call range are hands that are good enough to show down or so good that they're value bets, and a portion of your range are draws. Now, it's important to always have some draws in your turn bet call range, because in general, those hands are going to be your bluffs on the river if they checked you. Now, in some situations, if the river completes those draws, you might elect to turn some of your other hands into bluffs, some of your weakest hands. But in general, the draws are going to constitute the call turn check raise range and bluff when checked you on the river. And also, if your opponent does have a value bet in the turn, and they're check raising you, and generally that represents a hand like a turn 2 pair, or sometimes occasionally a slow played set or top 2, or on boards with straights or flushes, they're generally representing the flush or the straight when they check raise the turn. The thing about the draws are that they improve to hands that beat your opponent's check raise range. So a draw oftentimes can have a lot better equity against their value range than a hand like top pair, top kicker can. So let's think about the value and the bluff separately. Generally speaking, the value and the draw separately. Generally speaking, when we bet the turn with a value bet and we face a check raise, we generally ask ourselves a question here on the turn, which is, am I comfortable calling this hand down? Because the thing about the value bets are, when you bet them and face check raise, if you're not going to primarily be calling the river after calling the turn, what's going to happen is you're going to fold some value bets and you're going to fold some missed draws. You're going to end up folding way too much to the river barrel. So in general, a good rule I would make when betting the turn and facing a raise is, am I comfortable calling this down on rivers that are neutral to favorable? And if the answer is yes, then you should call turn, call river. And the answer is no, I tend to lean towards letting it go there on the turn. And there's a few more things that I've seen about turn check raises relative to flop check raises. In general, I've seen, at least in the player pool, these raises be much stronger. I've seen the follow-up after generally be a higher frequency. So, you want to really avoid betting the value bets on the turn, and calling the turn to fold to river bet. Now, you can take that with a few value bets, and it's especially okay to take that with some value bets if the river is dynamic and changes the texture in a way where a lot of your opponent's bluffs get there, and now your draws have gotten there as well. Then it can be okay to let some of those hands go. But in general, you're making your decision with those value bets on the turn. And if you think about the way your turn range is created, you should be generally in the vicinity of a 1-to-1 value to bluff range on the turn, to set up for that 2.5-to-1 value range on the river. So let's just say 50% of your range is value, 50% are bluffs or semi-bluffs. Well, you can actually fold your bottom quarter or bottom 60% of semi-bluffs, and that's 30% of hands. And then you can fold, of the 50% of hands that are remaining that are value, you can actually fold around 20%, or rather 40% of that 50% and be okay. So let me just pull up Notepad really quick here, because I think I explained that in a little bit of a confusing way. So let's just say that on the turn, we're just going to make up an example here. Let's say that you're betting 100 combos, which is not correct. You're probably betting more. But let's just say it's 100 combos. 50 combos value, 50 combos bluff. Now, let's say your opponent chooses a size when they bet. That means they only have to get around 55% fold, okay? Well, that means you only need to continue with that means you only have to continue with 40% of your range. So, if that means you have to continue with 45% of your range, and you primarily want it to be value, because you primarily want it to be hands that are going to call down, then you really only need to be something along the lines of 30 combos value, 15 combos semi-bluffs, spelling. And of that, the 30 combos of value, you're going to be calling down on most brick rivers. You can maybe fold a couple of them. And the semi-bluffs are going to be mainly bluffs on the river if they check. Now, you could argue to make it a little bit more along the lines of this, so that when you do call, you're mainly going to be bluffing, or you're going to be able to bluff almost all of these hands and be fine because you're going to have around 25 combos of hands you want to value at. But the point remains, you're going to primarily be value when you do call the turn, and you're going to primarily be calling those hands down. And so you need to look at each of these things differently. The value are what hands do I most want to call down? And the bluffs are what hands have the best equity and removal against my opponent's range? So, generally speaking, it's better to call with hands that draw to hands that are beating what they're representing on the turn, and most draws will. But it's also better to have cards that are significant. You know, on a board like 9-8-7, a hand like Queen 10 is a very nice bet call because when you improve to the Jack, you have the nuts. 6, you still lose to Jack 10, which kind of sucks, but you also block part of the range of hands that are check raising for value. Now, I wouldn't get too hung up on the removal in those spots because generally speaking, the removal will kind of play both ways. If someone check raises you on 9-8-7X or 9-8-4 turn 7, if they are bluffing, they probably have a hand that has a straight draw on it, a hand like a 10X or 6X type hand. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the removal aspect. I just think that it's an important thing to note. So you should be selecting out of these hands both very particularly because in general, it's okay to allow your opponent, or it's okay for you to be folding about half your range or a little bit more. Excuse me. So you need to be selecting hands here that are okay to call down and hands that are okay to have a lot of equity against the range of hands that your opponent is repping. Generally speaking with the flush draws, if I had to break these down, if I had to give you some general rules here, I would say it's like this. Best top pairs call down, generally speaking. 2 pairs call down, generally speaking. Sets call down, generally speaking. Straights call down, essentially always. And then flushes are always going to be calling down. So these are basically all hands that are going to call down. And, you know, hands that you might want to consider folding are hands like... You might want to consider folding hands like overpairs with non-relevant blockers, right? Like if someone check raises you on 9-8-4-7, going back to that example. When you have a hand like 10s, that's a super sweet call down because you block Jack 10 and 10-6 and you have a lot of equity. Very happy to call that down. But you wouldn't want to call down a hand like aces because you can have 6-5, you can have 10-6, you can have Jack 10, you can have 2 pair, you can have sets. So aces, you'd want to just bet fold the turn, even though it seems very tight. And if your opponent is loose and aggro, you might want to consider calling it down. But it's much better to fold aces there on the turn than it is to call and fold river because they're going to have a lot of equity against you. You don't block any of the value bets, and you're going to have a lot of other draws that you're going to want to choose instead to bet, call, and fold the river. So overpairs, non-relevant blockers, weakest top pairs, going for value, the portion of your range, portion of weak value bets going bet, check. These are the kinds of hands that you're going to want to fold. And I have a couple examples of hands like that that we're going to want to fold. But as you can see, like generally speaking, you know, these hands are going to be a much higher percentage of your range than these. You know, overpairs generally not that many combos overall. Your weakest top pair is not going to be that many combos. And your portion of weak value is going to be bet, check, not going to be that many as well. These are going to be hands like middling top pairs. These actually two things will end up being similar hands a lot. This could be a hand where you raise 10-9 and the flop is Jack 7-3 and you turn a 10 and you decide you're going to go bet check, which can be okay. I think both betting and checking can be reasonable turn plays. So in general, you're going to pick out your folds kind of specifically, and when you do call your value bets, you're going to be calling down. Now, your call fold, generally speaking, if I had to give you best flush draw. Okay, so let's talk about some of these call folds. So on boards that are very draw heavy, you get to be a little bit more selective with the draws that you do decide to call. Now, general rules, nut flush draw, you're always going to call. Best open-end straight draw, you're always going to call. And that hand can sometimes be flop checked, so you're going to have less combos that anyway, so it makes it so that always calling it is not going to be that many combos of your range. And flush draw plus straight draw is always going to call. Now, once you get past that, you're going to have to kind of get a little more creative on some boards. So, like, let me give you some examples. Jack 7-3, 2, rainbow. All 10-9, 10-8, 9-8 should be bet call some percentage. And maybe that's like something around the lines of 50%. Now, the reason that it's like that here is because while you might have 5-4, I mean, you will have 5-4. And I guess you could bet call 6-5 and 6-4 a small percentage as well. But while you're going to have 5-4 here, you're not going to have straight flush draws. So, and you're not going to have open edge other than 5-4. So in this situation, you're going to have to take these hands and call them more aggressively. Now let's say that it's a board like Jack 7-3-2 double suited. Well, now 10-9, 9-8, 10-8, 9-8 generally be folds. Because you're going to have flush draws, you're going to have straight draw plus flush draws. You know, you're going to have all of these hands with the flush draw as well. You're going to have 5-4. You know, these should probably be a very small percentage of calls. Let's call it like 20% calls, something along those lines. You can mix in a small portion. Maybe you want to bet call it when you have one of the suits on the board some percentage of the time. But basically, you don't have to be as selective on Jack 7-3-2 rainbow because you have less draws than you do on Jack 7-3-2 double suited. Let's see, what would be another good example of a board? Okay, so like the really draw heavy boards, let's just say it's like here on this board, you're going to be folding all straight draws other than Jack 9. And you're going to definitely want to fold hands that are like fold like King 3 of diamonds, or you know, maybe a hand like Queen 3, Queen 2 of diamonds. Some of these weak draws. Okay, so now that we've broken down all of that stuff, let's go ahead and take a look at some examples that I picked out. I picked out a couple of folds that I just kind of wanted to use to highlight my point. It is okay to bet fold some of these hands. You will not overfold. So these first couple hands are kind of boring, but Jack 9 here, I think I'm electing to go bet check. Again, Jack 9 in that portion of your range, you want to mix between checking flop, betting flop to check turn, and betting flop, betting turn to check river. Two street hand, you can put this into a lot of different areas. And in general, when you have a hand like Jack 9 here, you need to figure out kind of what your opponent is doing, what their strategy is. And then, like, let me give you some examples here. I know we're kind of getting off topic, off check raise, but I forgot if I talked about this specifically beforehand. But you know, if you're playing someone with a low fold to flop c-bet, low fold to turn c-bet, high fold to river c-bet, in general, this could be a great candidate to go bet check, right? Because you're going to get value on the flop, you're going to get value on the turn. Let's say that they have a low check raise by street. It could be another good candidate to go bet check. Let's say if they have a very high probe and barrel, checking back becomes way better, right? Let's say that you're playing someone that plays a little more like the lines of how I play, or someone with a relatively low flop fold and a turn fold that's on the higher side. We'll get more into that in the big blind, but let's just say you're playing someone more like that. Then it could be reasonable to bet flop to check turn to trap them on the river and go for a bet check bet type line. So anyway, we bet the turn here and get check raised. And again, this is kind of what I'm talking about, guys. Like, if you look at the way that this works, he is risking 1,800 to win a pot of, what is it, 2,800. So if we just fold 60, if he has no equity, we can fold 63% of the time here and be fine. This is what I'm talking about. You don't have to float light. Now, obviously, if you start betting way too many of these hands, then you're going to end up in trouble. But here's the thing. Because you're splitting these between flop check and turn check and bet, this is actually not that many combos of hands relative to a hand like tens, where you have all combos, or relative to a hand like, 8-7, where you're going to have almost, I probably have all combos 8-7 here. I might check a couple combos back in the flop just so I can have that in my range. But generally speaking, you're not going to have that many combos of this relative to a hand like King 9 or Ace 9, where those hands are going to have to go bet, call, call. So Jack 9, one of my weakest nines, I'd go bet, maybe 10 nines, one, pretty close. One of my weakest nines, not that many combos of this hand, risking a lot to win a little, so you were okay just letting it go here on the turn. Let me move this to the side. Okay. King Jack, open it up, get a call. King 9-7. Oh yeah, and also I just want to say that I know we were talking about a lot of mid to low board textures. I decided for facing turn check raise, I just wanted to find the most interesting hands that I could. So we're going to be looking at a lot of different textures here. Go for the flop bet, get a call. Turns a 5 and face a check raise. So again, looking at the math here, he's risking 1,000 to win a pot of 15-16. $67 fold. Should obviously be folding some top pairs. King Jack, probably one of the best hands to fold. I mean, King Jack, King 10. You could debatably fold almost all your kings here. You're going to have 8-6. You're going to have King 9, King 7, 9-7. You're going to have hands like Jack 10. If we look to talk about the semi-busted float, we're going to float some Jack 10s, our best open-ender. I'd maybe float a small percentage of 10-8 as well. And then you also want to make sure you float the flush draws that have straight draws as well. And again, you want to spread the floats along the line. I would say in general, if you want to randomize and float a wider range of straight draws rather than putting it across specific ones, that's fine. But at the end of the day as well, I will say that straight draws, the stronger ones, are better. So you don't want to get too carried away. The only thing I might say about 10-8 versus Jack 10 in this flops on this board specifically is that 10-8 does block 8-6, and Jack 10 does block, really two cards that are both potential bluff cards for your opponent. So you might argue that 10-8 is actually the superior bet call here, because both straights the 10-8 improve to beat 8-6, whereas Jack 10 both blocks. So if you want to do that and mainly fold Jack 10, mainly call 10-8, it's fine to bet call. But I do want to take this moment to say that when you start to get super, super into the nitty-gritty about which hands are better or worse, one thing that often happens to players is they suffer in total frequency. So like when we go back to this notepad and we look at, like, for example, we're going to be bet calling here on the turn. By playing it kind of like this in general, my frequencies are going to end up being pretty reasonable, and maybe so like generally speaking, the nut flush draw, we're usually checking. Let's say this is like 2 combos, and then like this is going to be something along the lines of like 6 combos, and then this is going to be along the lines of something like 8 combos. So maybe this is like more like our first example, where it was 15 and 35, or 20 and 30, or what. The point remains. I'm like getting hung up on like trying to make the combos correct when it's like totally relevant. But the point is, by having a more mapped out strategy like this, we keep our combos about in the place that they need to be. Also, by the way, that was an example, so it's really more like 150 combos the bet call turn. So we're getting way off topic. The point is, in a lot of situations, I generally tend to favor efficiency of the decision by making my total strategy have the right frequencies over trying to pick out the exact best possible combos. Although in situations like this, if you have the ability to recognize 10-8 as the superior play to Jack-10, that's fine. But one thing that I think does happen to players is when they have 10-8, they're like, oh, you know what, 10-8 is a better play here. And then when they have Jack-10, they're like, oh, it's my best open-ender. And the point is, start off with that same logic that I just used to create your range, and then look at each individual hand and think about whether there's a better option. But in general, try to favor the overall frequency of the range rather than the exact combos of the range. Okay, anyway, I'm a little bit off topic. But anyway, so we have a clear fold here with King Jack. Now I have a few hands that I thought were pretty cool. Okay, this hand is actually, I remember playing this hand. This is, I mean, it's up there on one of my favorite hands I've ever played. So we open up aces. And we get a call here from Dino King. Will Hossoff, those you don't know. Queen 7-6, very clear bet for value. Could maybe work a very small percentage check-in, particularly with the ace of diamonds. I think Dino King low probe, high fold to delay, so not really a lot of value in going for that line. So I probably would almost never do that against him. Bet the turn and face check raise. So we go back to our list of hands we're going to bet call. Okay, so we can fold overpairs, non-relevant blockers. Weakest style is going for value. Well, this doesn't really fall into either of those categories. We have an overpair with a super, super relevant blocker. Actually, now I'm thinking about this. This is not a very relevant blocker because in this match, I believe Dino King was flatting almost no suited aces to open. So the King of Diamonds is a super relevant blocker, but the Ace of Diamonds isn't. What's important here is that this hand has equity against range to continue. Obviously on Diamond, we're going to have the nuts, and we're very deep. So this is more of an equity / too high of my range to fold type of call. The Ace of Diamonds does not end up being that significant here. Okay, so we go for the call. And the river is a 4 of hearts. And you know what? It's so funny. I remember this hand being played, and now I don't like it. Now, okay, so let's just talk about everything. So for starters here, our opponent just bet 43,000 to 36,000. Okay, he's basically saying he has a flush. So we would jam here on the river with the nut flush. Obviously, nuts. The king high flush, because we know it's going to be good. He doesn't really have the ace high flushes. And the queen high flush also reasonable. I might base it around the blockers with the queen high flush. Sorry, the jack high flush, I mean, rather. Queen high flush, clearly not a possible hand. So if we had a hand like Jack 3 of diamonds, it would be a very reasonable jam. A hand like Jack 10 of diamonds, I probably would call because you block the 10 high flushes that you want him to be bet calling. Now, I decided to move in here, and you can't really have that many bluffs. Let's start with the value. We're going to start with the value. Okay, so let's just say a new part in this notepad, and let's talk about our value. So we're going to have the nut flush, a few combos, not many. We're going to have like ace 3 of diamonds. Probably have ace 3, maybe ace 4 of diamonds. So ace 3 of diamonds. Going to have ace 4 of diamonds. Might go either way on the flop. We're going to have king. We're going to have a bunch of nut flush draws. Or second nut flushes. We're going to have king 3 of diamonds. King 4 of diamonds. King 5 of diamonds. Not going to have king 6, king 7 of diamonds. King 8 of diamonds could go either way. So we'll say these. Maybe king 8 of diamonds. No, we'll not put it in there. And then jack 3 diamonds. Jack 4 diamonds. Jack 5 diamonds. Okay, I'll say something like this. Maybe jack 6 diamonds. No, we wouldn't have that. Okay. So we're going to have something along the lines of 8 combos of flushes that we're looking to jam for value. If you have a hand like 10-9 of diamonds, we're going to be calling. Because especially facing an overbet, it doesn't really make that much sense to try and go for value. He's basically saying that he has a flush or nothing. So don't really see the middle to low flushes wanting to be calls. So in this situation, I thought at the time, okay, so I want to have these 8 combos for value, and we're going to be able to pick out a couple combos of bluffs, but you really can't risk that many combos as a bluff because you're jamming 82,000 here to win to an 80K, so the price in the bluff is pretty good, but he's going to be getting insanely good odds when you jam here. He only needs 19% equity to call, so we can only have about 1.5 to 2 combos of bluffs. Now, what bluffs make the most sense? Well, generally speaking, against a traditional opponent here, I would say that you want to block the nut flush because your opponent will have some nut flushes, and having the ace of diamonds means they never have the nut flush. So the next question is, what is the worst hand we're going to call? And I think that we're going to be calling flushes always. And then after that, how many non-flushes do we have to call, given the fact that this turn raise is huge? That's not huge. Actually, it's a reasonable size. Okay. So we're going to have to continue about 30 to 40% of hands here. And we only have to continue about 45% of hands here. I'm not really sold to call too many non-flushes. If you fold all of your 2 pairs and sets and only call flushes, you're probably slightly overfolding. So we would need to call some hands down. I guess it could be reasonable to call with the 2 pairs with the 6 of diamonds. That does have some relevant removal, although it's not as relevant. The thing is that I'm thinking about now, the ace of diamonds doesn't really matter that much because my opponent doesn't flat the ace of diamonds pre. So the king of diamonds is, I think, the really relevant card here. And so I think that kings with the king of diamonds should call. King, queen with the king of diamonds should be the bluff jam, not aces. And I think I'm actually okay with folding hands like aces and ace queen with the ace of diamonds. But against a more traditional opponent, you'd want to be jamming with a hand like this if you decide you're going to fold ace queen and jam aces. But the ace of diamonds isn't as relevant as I originally thought. And let me just pull this range up because I think... And we're getting a little bit off topic, but that's okay. Why not? Here to do some learning. Okay. Hold'em range visualizer. Okay, so this is what Dino King's 3-bet range ended up looking like against me in the sample. Even a lot of these low hands ended up being 3-bets primarily, I believe. I guess he did have ace-2 of clubs here, so he could certainly have some of these. Yeah, all right, you know what? I take it back. Old Doug knew what he was doing. Okay, cool. All right, so he primarily doesn't have the ace of diamonds because most are 3-betting. But the bluff still should be the ace of diamonds because then we block him from having the nuts, which is better than blocking him from having the second nuts. However, you could still make an argument the king of diamonds is the more relevant card because he has more frequency. He's more frequently likely to have the second nut flush rather than the nut flush here. Regardless, I think all of these hands with the high diamond need to be continues. I think hands like 2 pairs and sets need to be folds. And as long as you're calling down appropriately, you know, maybe this needs to be a call, actually. Maybe this should be a call, and ace queen with the ace diamond should be the bluff. I think that makes more sense, right? Because we want to play, we need to call about 40 or 45% of our range, and we want to continue with hands that have relevant blockers. So we need to continue with the hands with the ace and king of diamonds in them, and so that means that if you're folding ace queen with the ace of diamonds, you're probably going to be over folding. So maybe ace ace with the ace diamond should call, ace queen with the ace of diamonds should jam, and king queen and king king with the king of diamonds should both call. I think that's a totally reasonable way to play this. However, at the end of the day, the point is that on the river, you can certainly fold some of your value given this size, the 43 into 36K. Given this size, definitely going to be able to let some of these hands go. Whereas if you bet a more traditional size, something along the lines of 25K, 23K, you'd have to fold some of your straight draw plus flush draws, and you can maybe fold a couple value bets, but you can't really fold that many. But now that he's bet over half the pot, you know, when we think about the example we were looking at before, where you're going to have like 35 combos value, 15 combos bluffs, well, now you only have to continue, if you had 50 combos here, you only have to continue with about 23, 22 of them, which means you can fold all of these, and then even a third of these, and still be totally fine in terms of your overall frequency of calling, not to mention that your calls are going to have relevant blockers, so your call range is actually going to do pretty well, I think. This means that the big blind probably has to underbluff a bit because the small blind can call with such strong removal in this situation. Maybe the big blind, rather than bluffing 25-30% of the time, needs to be bluffing more along the lines of 20% of the time. But anyway, the point of the matter is you do need to pick some bluffs here with a high diamond, probably the ace of diamonds on average. And we got the fold. So that, oh shit, that was a pretty fun hand I played. Okay, a lot of concepts there, a lot going on, but I think you guys understand where I'm coming from. Okay, so king queen of spades. This is a pretty unique hand, but so the flop goes check bet. Call. Generally, I would advocate for checking king queen. However, as you get deeper, betting the stronger flush draws becomes more valuable because when you do cooler them, it's for a lot of money. And also, as you're deeper, the nut flush draws, the weak suited aces are more likely to be 3-bet in general by a lot of players. And in general, the Swedes have always liked to 3-bet the suited aces, so the second nut flush draw becomes stronger. For those reasons, I like betting more nut flush draws and second nut flush draws. But I think I would probably mix between the two. Even if I would bet this sometimes, I'd also like to check. You want to make sure you can have these types of hands in your check back range. They play really well there. And it allows you to go for some raises on some spade runouts when you do check back, both for value and as a bluff. Turn to 10 of spades, we bet full pot, and we get check raised. Obviously, we're looking to call down here. My opponent, this is actually kind of interesting. My opponent is representing a flush, obviously, but he does not representing the king or queen eye flush because I have both those blocked, and it's a 3x pre-flop, so he's not going to have a lot of the weak flushes. So he's essentially saying I either have a jack high flush or the ace high flush. I would anticipate 9-10 of spades 3-bet pre. I would anticipate 7-6 spades 3-bet pre. I would anticipate 9-6 spades to be close. Maybe you could have that flush specifically. But he's not going to have a hand like 7-2 of spades facing a 3x pre-flop and call. I think that hand is most likely either going to fold or 3-bet. So he's basically thinking it's a nut flush. It's funny, we have the second nut flush here, and here's another interesting thing, guys. Something to consider in these flush spots. We don't even have any blockers to the nut flush because he's not going to have ace, king, or ace, queen of spades. But we do have very relevant blockers to blocking the king and queen eye flushes, which are both value bets he could certainly have. Let me go for the call. And the river is the 7 of spades, and our opponent checks. Now, if he had a hand like jack 9 of spades, that is a straight flush. If he had a hand like 9-6 of spades, that's also a straight flush. I mean, realistically, we beat like jack 6 of spades or jack 9, jack of spades, but that wouldn't really check raise the turn. It has so much equity. I think in this spot, we are almost always beat. You know, if he did check raise the turn with a hand with the ace of spades and he got there on the river. And generally speaking, on the 3 flush turns, when you get check raised and the river makes it forward to a flush, that is a ridiculously good card for the big blind because their turn check raise range on the 3 flushes should be flushes and then cards with equity and removal, which means a high spade. So when you do get check raised as the small blind on the turn and the river is this card, your opponent, in order to even be able to bluff, has to get extremely creative. In fact, if you did check raise a hand like, let's just say 9-4 of spades on the turn, and you got this river, it is reasonable as the big blind to turn your 9 of spades into a bluff. And I know that sounds crazy, but I remember one day I was going through this because I was thinking about my range, and it's kind of hard to have worse than 9 of spades here. So if you do check raise the turn with a middling to low flush and the river runs out like this, you can go ahead and bluff because you can also for sure have the ace of spades because that should be your main hand you check raise bluff. You know, the ace or the king of spades, those should be your primary check raise bluffs here on the turn. And we're talking about the big blind now. So let's bring it back and talk about the small blind. As the small blind, you should be extremely careful in these spots and realize that you're going to be toast a lot. And toast here. Also, it's a situation here on the turn where, you know, the nut flush is not that likely because a lot of these hands are going to 3-bet pre-flop. So be careful when you're repping the nut flush in some situations. But he's also repping king, queen eye flushes here, so it's totally fine. All right, and the last hand I had for us today. Okay, this is a hand that I put in here because I really didn't like how Jungle played it. However, apparently he's on what looks to be 15 buy-ins of my money, so other hands apparently went well. Ace Jack 8, bet call, turn king, bet, and check raise. I'm really, really not a fan of having check raise ranges here on the turn. I'm sure that a GTO strategy would do it a small percentage, so I'm not saying that it isn't correct to do it a very small percentage. But here's the thing. If you start check raising all your queen 10s on the turn, you really open yourself up to some problems on the river, because you can't have ace king or ace jack, or a set. So you're capped out at ace 8, and you really allow your opponent to kind of hammer you if you do that. So I prefer to play all my range in the big blind as a call here on the turn. But we face a check raise, and this is where I think the hand is just real bad. Like, I don't see any reason to be betting this river. Small blind can definitely have ace jack, jack 8, ace ace, 8 8, jack jack. Ace ace probably not, probably going to check the flop primarily. But certainly jack 8. And, in this situation, if you're the small blind and you have queen 10 and you face this, you should absolutely jam. Do not be afraid to get stacked if somehow they check raise 2 pair. Because you know what? Check raising 2 pair in this turn is ridiculous. You lose to queen 10, you lose to all these higher 2 pairs. They're not going to have 2 pair. They're going to have a straight or a bluff. So because of that, in the big blind's shoes, I think he should be... I get it that if you always check the straight, you can't bluff, and that sucks. But, when you're this deep and you're out of position on a board where you're this clobbered, I think you should be playing a more passive strategy in the big blind, honestly. On these Broadway boards, the small blind's range has so many better hands than you. This should probably be a check call on the turn. And if you do check raise the turn, I think you got to just check the river. Because what are you going to do here if you face a jam? What are you going to do? You're just going to call off queen 10? I mean, you could do that. But, then you're always getting stacked when your opponent improves. You can also jam queen 10 to get you off a chop, and then can mix in a few combinations of bluffs as well. And all in all, not that much you can do about it. Excuse me. Of the queen 10, jungle could bet call. This is one of the best ones. He doesn't have a spade, so it's more likely that I have a hand like queen X of spades and choose to bluff. However, I'm probably not going to use queen X of spades to bluff here. Oh, shit, the camera went off. It's unlikely I'm going to use a hand like queen X of spades to bluff here, because when I face the river bet, I only have to continue about half my range. So what I would do is I would look at, okay, well, what's my value range? I'm going to have all jack 8s, which is going to be math, 6 combos. And I'm going to have all ace jacks, which is going to be also 6 combos. And I'm going to have all 8 8s, so 15 combos. And I'm going to have jack jack, so 16 combos. And then I'm also going to have half my queen 10, so I'll probably bet half, check half. So something on the line to 22 combos for value. And I can work in probably around 4, 5, 6 combos of bluffs. You have to be a little more selective with bluffs on boards where your opponent's value bets beat some of your value. In fact, let's not even consider queen 10, because that hand is not relevant to the situation. So we're going to have about 16 combos that beat queen 10. And so we can probably have something to the tune of, 5 to 6 combos of bluffs. I think that should almost always be ace 8. I think ace king you're going to have to bet call. Actually, maybe it should be ace king. It should probably be ace king. Because I'd rather bet call ace queen or ace 10, those block ways representing. So yeah, I think fold ace 8, jam a portion of ace king, call ace queen, ace 10. Yeah. Seems reasonable. Fold your draws. Also, if you just fold queen X of spades, 10 X of spades, you're probably not folding enough hands. You need to fold ace 8 as well. It's a full-size pot, so you have to fold half your range. Okay, cool. All right, so that's going to bring us to the conclusion here on turn check raise. We're going to go ahead and take a look at how to play against some river check raises.